So, you want to be beautiful in 1300. You picture something natural, something simple, clear skin, long flowing hair, maybe a little rose water behind the ears, and you are done. A world before filters, before contouring tutorials, before anyone had invented the concept of a skincare routine. Just honest, uncomplicated medieval beauty. Here is the problem with that lovely picture. The women walking through London and Paris in the year 1300 were bleaching their skin with lead, ripping their hairlines back by a full inch with tweezers, and rubbing their teeth with coral powder that cost more per ounce than most families spent on food in a week. They had a 12-step routine. They just did not have the word for it yet. Before we settle in, like and subscribe if you enjoy these, and drop a comment letting me know where you are tuning in from tonight. I always love seeing where these stories end up. Now, dim the lights. Switch on a fan for that soft background hum. Get yourself comfortable, and let your shoulders finally drop away from your ears. Tonight is a long one, so just settle in, let the screen do its thing, and we will take it from here. Was pale skin actually beautiful, or was it just expensive? Did medieval women really remove their eyebrows on purpose? What exactly was in the face cream, and why did it occasionally kill people? Was there a point where being too attractive could get you accused of witchcraft? Why did the church have opinions about your hair? How much of your annual income would a single beauty routine cost? And is it possible that a peasant woman with no products at all looked better than the queen? It is the year of our Lord, 1300. You are standing in front of a polished steel mirror the size of your palm, squinting at your own reflection in a room that smells like animal fat and lavender. You have plans tonight, and you are already running late, because beauty here takes hours, costs a fortune, and occasionally draws blood. You have been told, probably more than once, that medieval people had no real concept of beauty culture. That the idea of a daily routine, a careful sequence of products and preparation, is a modern invention. That the women of the Middle Ages washed their faces with water if they were lucky, rubbed a little animal fat into their skin if they were ambitious, and called the whole business finished before breakfast. And you believed it, because why would you not? Everything you have ever seen about the medieval world suggests simplicity. Rough fabric, plain food, faces weathered by outdoor labor and left entirely to the mercy of time and genetics. None of that is true, not even a little. The women of 1300 had beauty manuals. Real ones, written down, copied by hand, circulated between courts and convents and wealthy households the way a recipe book might travel between friends who take cooking a touch too seriously. The most famous collection was called the Trotula, a set of texts that originated in the medical school at Salerno in southern Italy and eventually spread across most of Western Europe. It contained recipes for skin whiteners, hair dyes, lip colors, treatments for wrinkles, remedies for blemishes, instructions for removing unwanted body hair, and techniques for making the entire body smell like something other than a medieval city in July. It was detailed, it was practical, and it was organized into categories that, if you squinted, would look uncomfortably familiar to anyone who has ever browsed the skincare aisle of a modern pharmacy. There were cleansers, there were moisturizers, there were exfoliants, there were targeted treatments for specific problem areas. There were products designed to enhance your natural features and products designed to completely overwrite them. The only real difference between a 13th century beauty regimen and a modern one is that the medieval version was more likely to contain mercury, more likely to cause a rash, and significantly more likely to be prescribed by a woman who also knew how to set a broken bone and deliver a baby in the same afternoon. The medieval beauty expert was not a specialist, she was a generalist who happened to know that crushed pearls mixed with lemon juice could do interesting things to your complexion. And these women were not experimenting blindly. They were not smearing random substances onto their faces and hoping for the best. The recipes in the Trotula and similar texts were refined over generations, tested against observable results, and adjusted with a specificity that suggests real, sustained, serious effort. The proportions mattered. The preparation methods mattered. The order of application mattered. One recipe for a skin brightening treatment specifies that the mixture must be stirred in one direction only, left to sit for exactly 3 days, strained through linen, and applied in thin layers that are allowed to dry between coats. That is not folk superstition. That is a protocol. That is someone who has tried it both ways and discovered that the version where you skip a step gives you a rash, and the version where you follow instructions gives you a complexion that catches the candlelight just right. The trotula even contained what a modern reader would recognize as a patch test. One recipe advises applying a small amount of a new preparation to the inside of the wrist and waiting to see if irritation develops before committing it to the face. 1300. A patch test. The beauty industry likes to pretend it invented caution around 1960. It did not. Courts had women whose unofficial role was beauty advisor, mixing custom preparations for noble ladies, adjusting recipes based on individual skin type and preference. Some of these women built genuine reputations. Others built genuine enemies, because a woman who could make a noble woman beautiful held a form of power that made the men around the court profoundly uncomfortable. We will come back to that later. So the next time you hear someone describe the medieval world as a place where people simply accepted whatever face God gave them and got on with it, know that the truth is closer to the opposite. They took what God gave them, looked at it carefully in a very small mirror, and then spent the next 3 hours systematically improving on it with the contents of several small clay pots that cost more than dinner. A modern beauty influencer filming a Get Ready With Me video would recognize the instinct immediately. She would understand the layering, the patience, the specialized products for specialized problems. She would nod along with the whole routine right up until the moment she read the ingredients list, at which point she would put the phone down and back slowly away. But the instinct is identical. And of all the things they did to that face, the one you would notice first, the one that would stop you in the middle of a crowded street and make you stare, is the forehead. You are not prepared for the forehead. In the year 1300, the single most important feature on a woman's face is the space between her eyebrows and her hairline. If you have a high, smooth, broad, luminous forehead, you are beautiful, full stop. Everything else, the eyes, the mouth, the shape of the jaw, all of it matters, but none of it matters as much as the sheer square footage of exposed forehead. The ideal face in this century is shaped like an egg, smooth, pale, gently curved, and dominated, overwhelmingly, by a forehead that takes up roughly a third of the total visual real estate. This is not an exaggeration. Look at any painting, any illuminated manuscript, any carved relief from this period. Every idealized woman has a forehead that a modern viewer would describe as, at minimum, startling. The hairline sits so far back, it almost seems to be retreating from the face entirely. The eyebrows are either invisible or reduced to the faintest possible suggestion of a line. The overall effect is a vast, pale, uninterrupted expanse of skin, stretching from the bridge of the nose to a point that feels uncomfortably close to the top of the skull. The Mona Lisa, painted 2 centuries later, still carries a faint echo of this standard. But in 1300, the fashion has not yet begun to soften. It is in full, aggressive, unapologetic bloom, and almost none of it is natural. The women who look like this in paintings were not born looking like this. They achieved it. Deliberately, painstakingly, and with a pair of iron tweezers that would make your eyes water just looking at them. The process is exactly what you think it is. You sit on a stool in a room that is hopefully warm enough to keep your skin from tightening, and someone stands behind you, a servant if you can afford one, a mother or sister if you cannot. They take the tweezers and they pluck, one hair at a time, starting at the natural hairline and working backward, pulling each hair out at the root, moving methodically across the forehead until the hairline has retreated to the desired position. This is not a 5-minute touch-up. This is a sustained campaign against your own scalp, conducted over multiple sessions, maintained with regular upkeep, and accompanied by the kind of low-grade, watering-eyed, teeth-clenching discomfort that modern people associate with aggressive eyebrow threading and then multiply by about 40. The eyebrows go too, not trimmed, not shaped into careful arches, removed, either plucked entirely or reduced to a line so thin it barely registers from across a room. The trochlea contains recipes for depilatory pastes that could speed the process, mixtures of quicklime and orpiment, a bright yellow arsenic compound that dissolved hair on contact. They worked beautifully. They also occasionally dissolved a thin layer of skin along with the hair, which was considered an acceptable trade-off for the result. You wanted a smooth forehead. The paste delivered a smooth forehead. If it also delivered a chemical burn that took a week to heal, well, nobody said this was comfortable. They said it was beautiful. Those have never been the same thing. There were gentler options if your skin could not tolerate the arsenic paste. Bandages soaked in vinegar and cat dung, applied to the hairline overnight, were supposed to weaken the hair follicles and thin the growth gradually over weeks. Whether this worked as advertised is debatable. That women tried it repeatedly and sincerely is not. The walnut oil treatment was the gentlest of all. Rubbed into the skin after plucking, it was believed to slow regrowth and soothe the irritation. Ant egg oil, made by crushing the eggs of a specific species of ant and pressing them for their moisture, was another option believed to inhibit hair from returning. The fact that these women had a post-plucking skincare step, a recovery protocol, tells you everything about the sophistication of the routine. This was not a single act of grooming performed once and forgotten. It was a system with maintenance schedules, product sequences, and ongoing costs that accumulated quietly over years. Today, a receding hairline is something people spend thousands trying to reverse. Entire industries exist to restore, thicken, transplant, and simulate hair that has retreated from the forehead. Clinics charge several £100s for a single session of follicular unit extraction, which is, when you strip away the medical terminology, just plucking in reverse. In 1300, women were paying in time, pain, and the occasional chemical burn to create the exact condition that modern clinics charge a fortune to fix. The beauty standard has not just changed. It has performed a complete reversal, and both versions of it are pursued with exactly the same desperate, expensive, slightly irrational commitment. That is the thing about beauty standards that nobody wants to hear. They do not have to make sense. They do not have to be consistent across centuries or even across decades. They just have to be the standard. And once they are, once the painters have painted them, and the poets have praised them, and the wealthy women at court have adopted them, everyone else lines up, opens their wallet, grits their teeth, and gets to work. That was true in 1300. It was true in 1900. It is true right now, tonight, wherever you are lying and listening to this. Your forehead is enormous. Your eyebrows are a memory. Your scalp still stings faintly from this afternoon's session. And you look, by every measure that this century has agreed upon, absolutely exquisite. Now, about the rest of your face. The rest of your face, in 1300, is a project. The forehead was the centerpiece, yes, but a beautiful forehead sitting above a ruddy, sun-marked, visibly human complexion would defeat the entire purpose. The goal is not to look like a person who takes care of herself. The goal is to look like a person who has never been outside, never worked a day, never been touched by wind or weather, or anything so vulgar as direct sunlight. The goal, if we are being honest about it, is to look expensive. And the single fastest way to look expensive in medieval Europe is to look pale. Pale skin in 1300 is not just an aesthetic preference. It is a statement. It tells everyone who sees you that you do not work in a field. You do not haul water. You do not stand over a cooking fire for hours, with the heat reddening your cheeks. You do not scrub floors, or carry baskets to market, or do anything at all that would put color into your face through effort. You stay indoors. You are shielded. You are kept. And that keeping costs money, which means your pallor is not really about your skin at all. It is about your household's income, broadcast across your face in a shade of white that says, louder than any words could, someone else does the labor here. This is the logic underneath every beauty standard that has ever existed. It is never really about the feature. It is about what the feature proves. Tanned skin will become fashionable in the 20th century, but only after outdoor leisure replaces outdoor labor as the primary reason a person gets sun. The tan will say the same thing the pallor says now, just in reverse. I have time. I have money. I have the luxury of doing this to my skin on purpose. The color changes, the economics underneath it never do. So you need to be pale, naturally pale if genetics were kind to you, artificially pale if they were not, which for most women in most of Europe, they were not. Enter the cosmetics. The cheapest option is flour. Simple wheat flour, dusted across the face, patted into the skin, left to sit and create a matte white surface that lasts about as long as it takes you to walk from your front door to the end of the street. It works in the sense that it makes you technically paler. It fails in the sense that it looks exactly like someone has dusted flour across their face, because that is precisely what has happened. A light sweat and the whole enterprise slides gently south. Rain is a catastrophe. The flour method is what you use when you cannot afford the real thing, but you want to gesture in its general direction. One step up from flour is rice powder, ground fine enough to blend more smoothly and with the advantage of absorbing moisture rather than dissolving in it. Rice is not cheap in Northern Europe, so even this moderate upgrade carries a price that puts it out of reach for the poorest households. Ground chalk mixed with a little animal fat creates a longer-lasting paste, but sits heavily on the skin and tends to crack along the lines of the face when it dries. The effect, by mid-afternoon, is not so much radiant pallor, as it is the look of a woman whose face is slowly returning to its natural state through a network of small, widening fissures. It is the medieval equivalent of foundation that does not match your neck. Everyone can see it, nobody mentions it. The social agreement holds. But if you have money, real money, the kind of money that does not ask what things cost before buying them, there is only one product worth discussing: ceruse. Venetian ceruse, specifically, if you want the best. White lead, ground to a powder so impossibly fine it feels like silk between your fingers, mixed with vinegar to form a smooth paste that goes on evenly, dries to a luminous finish, and stays on your face through heat, humidity, conversation, dinner, dancing, and anything else the evening has planned for you. It does not crack, it does not slide, it does not look like flour or chalk or any other cheap substitute. It looks like skin, perfect, flawless, porcelain skin that catches candlelight and holds it with a soft glow that makes every other woman in the room look slightly unfinished. Ceruse is the real thing. It is also, in the most literal possible sense, poison. Lead carbonate absorbs through the skin, slowly, cumulatively, inevitably. A single application will not harm you. A week of applications will not harm you noticeably. A year of daily use will begin to show its work in ways that you will not immediately connect to the product. Headaches that arrive in the afternoon and stay through the night. A heaviness in the limbs that rest does not fix. A faint metallic taste in the mouth that comes and goes. The skin underneath the ceruse, the actual skin, begins to coarsen and discolor, which means you need more ceruse to cover the damage that the ceruse itself is causing. It is a cycle so perfectly, viciously self-sustaining that it almost seems designed. The product creates the problem that only the product can solve. Over years, the damage deepens, the teeth loosen, the hair thins, which is bitterly ironic for a woman who has already plucked half of it out on purpose. The gums recede, the muscles weaken. In severe cases, the kidneys fail. In the worst cases, the damage is fatal, although it takes so long to accumulate that the cause is rarely identified. A noblewoman who has been using ceruse daily since her 20s might begin showing serious symptoms in her 40s. By then, the connection between the pretty white pot on her dressing table and the tremor in her hands is invisible to everyone, including her. And here is the part that makes it genuinely difficult to judge from a distance of 7 centuries. They knew. Not the full medical mechanism, obviously. Nobody in 1300 understood lead toxicity at the molecular level, but they understood that certain cosmetics caused illness over time. Medical text from the period warn against prolonged use of lead-based preparations. The trotula itself contains cautionary notes. Women shared observations within households, noticing that long-term ceruse users developed particular symptoms. The information was available. It was not hidden. It was not suppressed by a powerful cosmetics lobby. It was simply weighed against the alternative, which was going out in public without ceruse, looking like a woman who could not afford it, and accepting the social consequences. They chose the lead. Not because they were stupid, because they did the math. A small pot of quality Venetian ceruse cost roughly the equivalent of a skilled laborer's daily wage. That sounds almost manageable until you calculate daily use across months and years. A woman applying ceruse every morning is spending the equivalent of hiring a carpenter full-time exclusively for her face. And ceruse was only the base layer. Rouge went on top of it, made from cinnabar, which is mercuric sulfide, or from cheaper plant-based alternatives like alkanet root or Brazil wood, ground to a fine red powder and applied to the cheeks and lips with careful restraint. Too much rouge, and you looked common. Too little, and the pale base made you look ill. The correct amount was just enough to suggest the faintest, most delicate, most convincingly natural flush of health on top of a complexion that was entirely artificial. The effort required to look effortless was, as it has always been, staggering. A modern woman scrolling through a social media tutorial on the no-makeup makeup look, watching someone apply 14 products to achieve the appearance of wearing no products at all, is doing exactly what her counterpart in 1300 was doing with ceruse and rouge and a steel mirror the size of a playing card. The words are different. The ingredients are mostly less toxic. The psychological architecture is identical. But knowing what the product is and knowing where it comes from are different things entirely. That pot of ceruse on your dressing table arrived there through a chain of hands that stretches across half of Europe, and every link in that chain took a cut. It starts in a mine. Lead ore comes out of the ground in England, in Germany, in the mountains of Spain, pulled from the earth by men whose working conditions are approximately what you would imagine if you imagined the worst version and then made it slightly darker and significantly more cramped. The miners are paid by the day. The pay is not generous. The ore they extract is smelted at or near the mine site, refined into metallic lead, and sold in bulk to merchants who ship it along river and sea routes to manufacturing centers, primarily in Venice. In Venice, the lead is converted into lead carbonate through a process that is elegant in its chemistry and brutal in its labor. Thin strips of lead are coiled and placed inside clay pots with a small reservoir of strong vinegar at the bottom. The pots are sealed and stacked in a shed, sometimes buried under layers of fermenting horse dung or spent grape skins, which generate heat and carbon dioxide as they decompose. Over several weeks, the vinegar fumes and the carbon dioxide react with the lead surface, forming a white crust of lead carbonate on the strips. This crust is scraped off by hand, by workers who breathe the fine lead dust constantly, ground in mortars, washed in clean water to remove impurities, dried, and ground again to achieve the ultra-fine texture that distinguished Venetian ceruse from inferior products. The workers who scraped and ground the ceruse were the most exposed people in the entire chain. They inhaled lead dust all day, every working day, for as long as their bodies held up. Their life expectancy in the trade was not something anyone bothered to record with precision. It did not need to be recorded. It was visible. The finished ceruse was packed into small ceramic or wooden containers and shipped from Venice to trading hubs across Europe. Merchants in Bruges, in London, in Paris bought it wholesale and sold it through apothecaries, at markets, and through private channels to wealthy households. At each stage, the price increased. The miner earned a fraction of a penny for the ore that eventually became the ceruse. The Venetian manufacturer took a healthy margin for the processing. The shipping merchant added his transport costs and his profit. The local apothecary added his margin for storage, expertise, and the quiet discretion of not asking too many questions about who was buying how much and how often. By the time the ceruse reached the dressing table of a noblewoman in London, it had passed through at least 6 pairs of hands, each of which had taken their share. The miner who dug the lead out of a hole in the ground earned the least and suffered the most. The apothecary, who handed the little pot across a counter with a polite smile, earned the most and suffered not at all. The woman who applied it to her face paid the highest price of any of them, but the invoice for that payment would not arrive for another 20 years, and when it did, it would come not as a bill, but as a tremor, a headache that never quite left, a tiredness that sleep could not touch. That is the shape of every luxury supply chain that has ever existed. The people closest to the raw material absorb the most risk for the least reward. The people furthest from it collect the largest margin for the least effort. And the person at the end of the chain, the consumer, pays twice, once at the point of sale and once later, in ways the seller never has to see and never has to answer for. The ceruse sits on your dressing table in its little pot. It looks like cream. It smells faintly of vinegar. It goes on like silk, and it makes you look like a woman who has never known a hard day in her life. It cost you a carpenter's daily wage, and it cost a miner his lungs, and it cost a Venetian scraper a few more years off a life that was already running short. You dip 2 fingers into the pot, and you apply it to your forehead, the one you spent all morning plucking into the right shape, and the face, looking back at you from the little steel mirror, is smooth, pale, luminous, and perfect. You look beautiful, you look wealthy, you look like you have never touched lead in your life. And somewhere in a shed in Venice, a man is scraping white powder off a strip of metal, and he is coughing, and he will not stop coughing for the rest of his short and unremarkable life, and nobody, at any point in this chain, has asked his name. But the face is perfect, and tonight, that is what matters. Now, the pale skin is done, the forehead is done, and the rouge sits exactly where it should. But there is one more thing about your appearance that needs attention before you step outside, and it sits right on top of your head, covered, for the moment, by a linen veil that you are not entirely sure you want to remove. Your hair, underneath that veil, is a problem. Or more precisely, it is a project, and like every other project on your body tonight, it is one that costs time, money, and a willingness to endure things that a reasonable person would walk away from. The ideal hair in 1300 is long, very long, past the waist if you can manage it, and the longer the better, because length signals that you have never had it cut as punishment, never had it shorn upon entering a convent, and never suffered the kind of illness that thins it to nothing. Length is proof of an uninterrupted life, a life that has not been derailed by scandal, by God, or by disease. Your hair is your autobiography, and the only acceptable story it can tell is a boring one. The ideal color is golden, not brown, not black, not red, and certainly not the mousy, indeterminate shade that most of Northern Europe was actually born with. Golden, bright, warm, honeyed gold, the color of wheat fields in August, the color that troubadours write poems about, the color that painters use for the Virgin Mary and every angel that ever sat on a cloud looking serene. If you were born with this color, you are fortunate, and you know it. If you were not, and statistically, You were not. Then you are going to change it. Medieval hair dyeing is not for the timid. The premium recipe uses saffron. Saffron is, pound for pound, the most expensive spice in Europe. It always has been. It always will be. It takes roughly 70,000 individual crocus flowers, hand-picked at dawn before the petals open, to produce a single pound of saffron threads. The labor is extraordinary. The cost reflects it. Using saffron to dye your hair is the medieval equivalent of rinsing your hair in liquid currency and hoping the color sticks. It does, actually. Saffron produces a beautiful, warm golden tone that looks natural in a way that no cheaper alternative can match. It is also, per application, an act of financial commitment that would make a modern salon blush. If saffron is beyond your budget, and for most women, it is very much beyond their budget, there are alternatives. They are cheaper. They are also, without exception, more unpleasant. The most common recipe involves honey, wine lees, and urine. Human urine, to be specific, collected and aged until the ammonia content is high enough to act as a bleaching agent. The mixture is combined, heated gently, and applied to the hair in sections, which are then wrapped or left exposed to direct sunlight for several hours. The ammonia in the aged urine strips pigment from the hair shaft, while the honey adds a warm tone and the wine lees contribute acidity that helps the color take. The science is sound. The chemistry works. The experience of sitting in a garden with your hair soaked in fermented urine, waiting for the sun to do its work, while the smell announces your beauty ambitions to everyone within a significant radius, is something that no recipe book from the period describes in any detail, which tells you everything about what the detail would include. Lye is another option. Made from wood ash soaked in water, lye is alkaline enough to strip color from hair effectively, but also alkaline enough to strip moisture, elasticity, and structural integrity along with it. A single lye treatment leaves hair lighter but drier. Repeated treatments leave hair lighter, drier, brittle, and prone to breaking off in clumps, which rather defeats the purpose of growing it to your waist in the first place. The women who used lye regularly needed follow-up treatments to repair the damage. Oils, eggs, animal fat, and herbal rinses were applied after bleaching to restore softness and shine. This is a conditioner. They did not call it that, but that is what it was. A product designed to fix the damage caused by the previous product, sold as a necessary companion to the thing that broke it, generating two purchases where nature required none. A modern woman who bleaches her hair at a salon and then buys a 90-pound bond repair treatment on her way out the door is walking a path that was laid down 700 years ago. The chemicals have been refined. The smell has been improved considerably. The fundamental transaction, pay to damage, then pay to repair, has not changed at all. And after all of that effort, after the saffron or the urine or the lye, after the oils and the egg rinses and the careful sun exposure, you cover it. You put a veil over it, a wimple, a barbette, some form of linen or silk head covering that hides most or all of the hair you just spent an entire afternoon transforming. Because in 1300, a married woman displaying her uncovered hair in public is making a statement she may not intend to make. Loose, uncovered hair on an adult woman carries connotations of sexual availability, of youth not yet claimed by marriage, or of a deliberate, provocative refusal to observe the social codes that govern respectable femininity. Unmarried girls can wear their hair down. Married women cover theirs. The rule is not absolute, and it varies by region, by class, and by decade, but the general expectation is firm enough that ignoring it invites comment. So your golden hair, the hair you spent a fortune achieving, is visible only in private, in your bedchamber. In the company of your husband and your household women, the public never sees it. The public sees the covering, which is itself a fashion item, made from quality linen or imported silk, pinned and draped in styles that change with the decades and carry their own signals of taste and status. The covering is not a suppression of beauty. It is a relocation of it. The beauty of your hair becomes a private luxury. The beauty of your veil becomes the public performance. You are maintaining two simultaneous beauty projects, one visible and one hidden, and both of them cost money. It is the medieval equivalent of buying expensive underwear. The audience is small, the investment is not. And underneath all of this, underneath the plucked forehead and the cerise skin and the golden hair wrapped in silk, there is one more feature that tells the truth about your life, whether you want it to or not. Your teeth. You have been told that medieval teeth were universally terrible, that every smile in the Middle Ages was a horror, that dental hygiene was non-existent, and every person you met had a mouth that looked like a graveyard and smelled like something worse. This is one of the most persistent and most satisfying myths about the medieval period, because it makes the modern listener feel superior, which is a feeling that people enjoy so much they will believe almost anything to maintain it. Here is the truth, and it is going to rearrange your assumptions in a way that is genuinely uncomfortable. If you are poor in 1300, your teeth are probably fine, not perfect, not white in the way that modern cosmetic dentistry produces whiteness, but structurally sound, relatively free of cavities, and functional in a way that would surprise the modern viewer who has been trained to imagine medieval mouths as wastelands. The reason is diet. The medieval peasant eats coarse bread made from stone-ground grain, root vegetables, legumes, the occasional piece of salted or smoked meat, and whatever fruit or greens are available seasonally. This diet is high in fiber, high in coarse texture, and almost entirely free of refined sugar. Sugar exists in 1300, but it is an imported luxury, arriving from the Middle East and North Africa at prices that put it firmly in the category of spice rather than staple. A laboring family does not eat sugar. They cannot afford sugar, and because they cannot afford sugar, their teeth are spared the single most destructive substance in the history of human dentistry. The wealthy are not so lucky. A noble household has access to sugar. They use it in cooking, in medicines, in confections, in spiced wine. They eat white bread made from finely sifted flour, which is softer on the teeth, but also stickier and more prone to lodging in crevices. They eat preserved fruits in honey. They eat marchpane, the ancestor of marzipan, which is essentially sugar and almonds pressed into shapes and consumed as a luxury treat. Their diet is sweeter, softer, and more refined than the peasant diet in every way. It is also, in dental terms, significantly more destructive. The result is exactly what the chemistry predicts. Noble teeth decay faster. They develop cavities more frequently. They abscess, they crack, they loosen in the gums, and they fall out at ages that a peasant farmer, chewing his way through another piece of bread that could double as a building material, would find surprising. The sugar that proves you are wealthy is also the sugar that rots your mouth, and the connection between the two is so consistent and so visible that it eventually becomes, in certain times and places, a perverse mark of status in itself. In later centuries, there are accounts of people deliberately staining their teeth to suggest sugar consumption they could not actually afford. Blackened teeth as a deliberate flex, the logic is so perfectly, beautifully deranged that it could only come from human beings, who are the only species on Earth that will voluntarily make themselves uglier in one dimension in order to seem richer in another. The poorer you are in 1300, the better your teeth. It is one of the very few categories where having no money is quietly winning. Your teeth are worn down, certainly. The grit in stone-ground flour acts like sandpaper on enamel over a lifetime, grinding the surfaces flat and smooth. An older peasant's teeth are short and worn, but often cavity-free. An older noble's teeth are full-length, but riddled with decay. If you had to choose a medieval mouth to inherit, and you were making the decision based purely on structural integrity, you would choose the poor one every time. Dental care does exist. It is limited, but it is not absent. Tooth powders made from sage, salt, ground coral, or cuttlefish bone are rubbed onto the teeth with a cloth or a finger. Mint and clove are chewed for breath. Mouthwashes made from vinegar and wine are used to clean the mouth after meals. These are not comprehensive dental hygiene programs by any modern standard, but they are not nothing. They are people doing what they can with what they have, which is all anyone has ever done in any century. When a tooth goes bad, truly bad, the options narrow to one: extraction. Tooth pullers operate at markets and fairs, offering their services to anyone whose pain has become worse than their fear. The procedure is exactly what it sounds like: no anesthetic beyond a stiff drink, and whatever courage you can locate on short notice. The tooth puller grips the tooth with a pelican, a specialized metal instrument shaped vaguely like its namesake, levers it loose from the jaw, and pulls. The whole business takes less than a minute if the puller is skilled. It takes longer if the tooth breaks, which it does more often than anyone would prefer, leaving a root fragment that either works its way out over time or festers until a more invasive extraction becomes necessary. A tooth puller at a country fair charges a penny or two. A court physician attending to a noble's dental problems charges significantly more, although the technique is not significantly better. The main advantage of the expensive dentist is privacy. You suffer in a private room instead of in the middle of a market square with an audience, which, when you think about it, is the same premium people pay for private medical care today. The medicine is the same. The waiting room is nicer. And the cost of sugar, the substance responsible for most of the dental misery in the upper classes, tells its own story about the economics of beauty and status. A pound of sugar in 1300 England costs roughly 2 shillings. A skilled laborer, your carpenter, your mason, your experienced craftsman, earns between 4 and 6 pence per day. 2 shillings is 24 pence. That single pound of sugar represents 4 to 6 full days of skilled labor, a quantity that a modern household would buy without a thought, carried home in a plastic bag and forgotten in a cupboard, cost a medieval family the better part of a week's income, and they bought it anyway. Because sugar was sweet, because sugar was rare, because sugar proved you had arrived, and if it cost you your teeth, well, you could always close your mouth when you smiled. Beauty in every century involves knowing which features to show and which to hide. In 1300, the wealthy learned early to smile with their lips closed. Your own teeth, wherever you sit on the social scale tonight, are doing the best they can with the hand they were dealt. The bread is keeping them strong, but wearing them flat. The sugar, if you can afford it, is keeping them interesting in ways you would rather it did not. And the tooth puller at next month's fair is always there, with his pelican and his steady hand, if the situation becomes genuinely unbearable. But that is a problem for another day. Tonight, your face is done. Your forehead is high and smooth. Your skin is pale and luminous. Your hair is golden underneath its silk covering. Your teeth are your teeth, and there is only so much you can do about that. You look beautiful, or at least as close to the standard as money and pain could bring you. And now it is time to wash the rest of you, which brings us to the part of the medieval world that everyone thinks they know, and almost nobody actually does. You have been told that medieval people did not bathe, that they lived in filth, accepted filth, and considered filth a normal and unremarkable feature of daily existence, that the entire medieval world smelled like an open sewer, and nobody minded because nobody knew any better. This is probably the single most widely believed myth about the Middle Ages, repeated so often and with such confidence that it has achieved the status of common knowledge, which is the most dangerous category of information because it is the one people never bother to check. They bathed. They bathed a lot. They bathed so much that the church occasionally had to ask them to stop. Public bathhouses operated in every major city in medieval Europe. London had them. Paris had them. Bruges, Florence, Cologne, Barcelona, all of them had bathhouses, plural, scattered across the city and open to anyone who could afford the entry fee, which was typically around a penny. 1 penny. the price of a loaf of bread, the price of a tooth extraction at a country fair. For that penny, you got access to hot water, a wooden tub, and the company of everyone else in your neighborhood who had decided that today was the day they were going to be clean. The bathhouses, called stews in England, were heated by wood fires burning beneath stone or metal floor systems that warmed the water and the room simultaneously. The technology was simple, but effective. You walked in from a medieval street that smelled like medieval streets tended to smell, and you stepped into a space that was warm, humid, and scented with whatever herbs the bathhouse keeper had thrown into the water that morning. Lavender, rosemary, mint, juniper. The combination varied. The purpose did not. You were here to get clean, to get warm, and to spend an hour or two in a space that was, by the standards of your daily life, genuinely pleasant. The bathing itself was thorough. You soaked, you scrubbed, using cloths, bundles of herbs, or handfuls of bran that acted as a mild exfoliant. Soap existed and was available, particularly the fine hard soaps manufactured in Castile and Marseille using olive oil and lye. Castile soap was a recognized luxury import, arriving in Northern Europe at prices that reflected the distance it had traveled and the quality of its production. A bar of genuine Castile soap was smooth, hard, pale, and lightly fragrant with olive oil, and it lathered in a way that the locally produced tallow soaps could not match. If you could afford it, you used it. If you could not, you used the tallow soap or you used no soap at all and relied on hot water and vigorous scrubbing, which, in fairness, accomplishes more than modern marketing would like you to believe. The bathhouse was also a social space. This is the part that confuses modern people, who think of bathing as a private activity conducted alone behind a locked door. In 1300, bathing is communal. You are in the water with other people. You are talking, gossiping, conducting minor business negotiations, catching up on neighborhood news, and generally treating the experience as something halfway between a spa visit and an evening at a pub. Food and drink were available at many bathhouses. Some served meals, some had attendants who would scrub your back, wash your hair, cut your nails, and shave you for an additional fee. The full-service bathhouse experience was not just hygiene, it was an afternoon out. And yes, some bathhouses offered other services. The church was not wrong about that. The line between a respectable bathhouse and a disreputable one was blurry enough that the word stew itself eventually became a euphemism for a brothel, which tells you something about how frequently the two businesses overlapped. Southwark, across the Thames from the City of London, was famous for its stews, and the Bishop of Winchester, who owned much of the land in Southwark, collected rents from the bathhouse keepers, without asking too many questions about what exactly was being washed. The phrase Winchester geese, a slang term for prostitutes working the Southwark stews, carries his name as a quiet, permanent, mildly embarrassing memorial to the arrangement. But the existence of disreputable bathhouses does not mean all bathhouses were disreputable, any more than the existence of questionable modern massage parlors means every spa is a front for something. Most bathhouses were exactly what they appeared to be: places where ordinary people went to get clean, get warm, and get out of the cold for an hour. Families used them. Tradesmen used them after work. Women had designated bathing times or separate facilities in larger establishments. The experience was normal, routine, and unremarkable, which is precisely why it was so rarely described in detail by contemporary writers. Nobody writes about the things everyone does. They write about the things that are unusual. And bathing, in 1300, was not unusual at all. The private bath was a different experience entirely. If you are wealthy, if you have a household with servants, and a room that can accommodate a large wooden tub, you bathe at home. The tub is lined with linen cloth to prevent splinters. The water is heated in the kitchen and carried up in buckets by servants, poured in stages, tested for temperature, and adjusted with cold water until it is comfortable. Herbs and flowers are added to the water. Rose petals, if you have them, chamomile, lavender, The room is draped with linen to keep the warmth in and the drafts out. The whole production takes the better part of an hour to set up, involves several servants, consumes a significant quantity of firewood, and is therefore not something you do casually. A private bath is an event. It requires planning, resources, and a household staff willing to haul water upstairs without audible complaint. The experience, once everything is prepared, is luxurious in a way that a modern person would recognize immediately. Hot water, soft linen, fragrant steam, and an hour of uninterrupted quiet in a warm room. The medieval private bath is a spa treatment. It is self-care, 700 years before anyone monetized the concept and printed it on a candle. The only meaningful difference is that the medieval version requires significantly more labor from people who are not you, which is true of most luxuries in every century. So why does the myth persist? Why does everyone believe that medieval people were filthy if they were in fact washing themselves regularly and with evident enthusiasm? The answer lies in what happened later. The decline of bathing in Europe did not occur during the medieval period. It occurred in the 16th and 17th centuries, driven by a combination of plague fear and changing medical theory. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the 14th century and returned in waves for the next 300 years, a theory emerged that bathing opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body through the skin. Hot water, steam, and the communal atmosphere of the bathhouse were all reimagined as vectors for contagion. The bathhouses began to close. Public bathing declined. By the 16th century, the medical consensus had shifted firmly against water contact with the skin, and the elaborate bathing culture of the medieval period was replaced by a new regime of dry cleaning, linen changes, and perfume applied in generous quantities to mask whatever was happening underneath. The myth of the filthy medieval person is actually a description of the early modern person, projected backward onto an era that does not deserve it. 1300 was clean. 1500 was getting nervous about it. 1650 had largely stopped. The filth belongs to the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, not to the Middle Ages. But the Middle Ages have worse public relations, so they got the blame. You step out of the bath tonight, in 1300, clean and warm and smelling faintly of rosemary. Your skin is scrubbed pink beneath the ceruse you have not yet reapplied. Your hair is wrapped in linen, still damp. You feel, for this brief moment between the bath and the next round of cosmetic application, genuinely comfortable in your own body. It will not last. The ceruse goes back on. The veil goes back up. The performance of beauty resumes within the hour. But for now, wrapped in linen in a warm room, you are simply clean. And clean, in 1300, smells like something specific, which brings us to the question of what, exactly, a beautiful person in this century was supposed to smell like. The short answer is expensive. A beautiful person in 1300 smells expensive. The long answer involves whales, cats, deer, and an import network that stretches from the coast of East Africa to a small ceramic bottle on your dressing table. Fragrance in medieval Europe is not a casual afterthought. It is not a spritz of something pleasant applied at the last minute before leaving the house. It is a layered, deliberate, carefully constructed sensory presentation that communicates wealth, taste, and refinement as clearly as your clothes and your complexion do. How you smell tells people who you are, and the vocabulary of medieval scent is rich, specific, and extremely expensive at the top end. The base layer is rose water. Distilled from rose petals, rose water is the most widely available quality fragrance in medieval Europe. It is produced locally in some regions, imported from the Middle East and North Africa in others, and used in quantities that would surprise a modern perfumer. It goes on the skin, it goes in the bath, it goes on the linens, it goes into food and drink. It is the medieval all-purpose fragrance, versatile enough to function as a perfume, a cosmetic ingredient, a cooking additive, and a medicinal preparation simultaneously. A bottle of rose water on a medieval dressing table is the equivalent of a product that is moisturizer, toner, room spray, and cocktail ingredient all at once. Above rosewater, the fragrances become rarer and more expensive with each step. Musk comes from the musk deer, a small animal native to the mountains of Central and East Asia. The musk gland, located near the abdomen of the male deer, is removed, dried, and traded along routes that can take years to complete. By the time musk reaches a European market, it has traveled thousands of miles, passed through dozens of hands, and accumulated a price that reflects every single one of those transactions. A small quantity of musk, enough to scent a pomander or blend into a personal fragrance, costs more than most families spend on food in a month. Ambergris is stranger still. It is a waxy substance produced in the digestive tract of sperm whales, expelled into the ocean, and collected from beaches or from the surface of the sea. Fresh ambergris smells terrible. Aged ambergris, which has floated in salt water and been exposed to sun and air for months or years, develops a complex, sweet, musky scent that medieval perfumers prized above almost everything else. It was worth, quite literally, its weight in gold. Finding a lump of ambergris on a beach was the medieval equivalent of winning a lottery you did not know you had entered. Civet is extracted from the perineal glands of the civet cat, a process that is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds for the animal involved, and the resulting paste, diluted and blended with other ingredients, adds a warm animalic depth to fragrances that floral ingredients alone cannot achieve. The fact that 3 of the 4 most prized fragrance ingredients in medieval Europe come from animal secretions is something the modern perfume industry prefers not to dwell on, but the chemistry is sound. These substances contain compounds that fixate volatile floral scents, making them last longer on the skin. The musk, the ambergris, and the civet are not just pleasant smells, they are the technology that makes the pleasant smells persist. A wealthy woman in 1300 layers her scent deliberately, rosewater on the skin after bathing, musk or civet blended into an oil applied at the wrists and throat. A pomander, a small perforated metal ball filled with a blend of ambergris, cloves, cinnamon, and dried rose petals, hung from the belt or carried in the hand. Sachets of dried lavender and herbs tucked into the clothes chest so that every garment carries a faint, clean, herbal base note underneath the more complex personal fragrance. Scented gloves, treated with fragrance oils and worn in public, add another layer. The total effect is a woman who moves through a room trailing a gentle, complex, shifting cloud of scent that announces her presence and her wealth simultaneously. A tradesman's wife cannot afford musk or ambergris. Her scent is simpler, but still deliberate. Lavender, dried and tucked into linen. Rosemary rubbed on the hands. A handful of cloves chewed for the breath. A pomander made from an orange studded with cloves, if oranges are available and affordable, which they are not always. Her fragrance says something different from the noblewoman's fragrance, but it says it just as clearly. I am clean. I am careful. I am paying attention to myself. In a world where your scent is one of the first things another person notices about you, paying attention is not vanity. It is communication. The air around you now carries rosewater and something warm underneath it, something musky and foreign that you cannot quite name, but that makes you feel, in some way you could not articulate, more present, more real, more worth paying attention to. Your pomander hangs from your belt, a small perforated silver ball that clicks gently against your hip when you walk. Inside it, ambergris and cloves and cinnamon are doing their slow, quiet work, releasing scent with your body heat, filling the small space around you with a warmth that belongs to you and nobody else. You smell beautiful, and in 1300, that is not a small thing. That is a statement, a strategy, and an investment, all carried in a cloud of imported air that follows you wherever you go. But scent is invisible. What people see when they look at you, after the face and the hair and the fragrance have done their work, is your body. And your body, in this century, is expected to be a very specific shape. The shape your body is supposed to be in 1300 is not what you think. If you are imagining the angular, lean, tightly controlled silhouette that modern fashion has spent the last several decades insisting is the only acceptable form a woman can take, set that image down gently and walk away from it. It does not apply here. It has never applied here. In this century, the body that painters paint and poets praise and wealthy families actively seek out in a prospective bride is soft, curved, rounded at the belly, full at the breast, wide at the hip, and carrying enough visible weight to make one thing absolutely clear to everyone who sees you. This woman eats well. This woman has never gone hungry. This woman is, by the only metric that matters in an era where famine is a recurring reality and not a historical abstraction, thriving. A flat stomach in 1300 is not a sign of discipline. It is a sign of poverty. It means you cannot afford enough food to fill yourself properly, or that illness has taken the weight from you, or that your household is struggling in ways that are now written across your body for everyone to read. The modern obsession with visible abdominal muscles, with a torso that looks like it has been carved from something rather than fed by someone, would genuinely baffle the people around you tonight. They would look at it and see need. They would see want. They would see a woman whose life has not gone well, displayed in the one place you cannot hide it. The ideal silhouette is the Gothic S curve. You have seen it in paintings and carvings, even if you did not know its name. The body stands with the belly pushed gently forward, the shoulders drawn back, the spine describing a shallow S shape that emphasizes the belly as the central feature of the figure. Clothing is designed to support this silhouette. The overtunic falls from a high waist and drapes over the belly, following its curve, accentuating it, celebrating it. There is no corset here, no boning, no structural undergarment designed to compress or reshape. The garments follow the body, and the body they are following is round. Pregnancy is not hidden. It is not disguised beneath loose clothing, or treated as a temporary inconvenience to be endured and then reversed as quickly as possible. A visibly pregnant woman in 1300 is a woman at the height of a particular kind of beauty, one that signals fertility, health, prosperity, and the continuation of a family line. The phrase bouncing back, the modern expectation that a woman's body should return to its pre-pregnancy state as rapidly as possible, preferably before anyone has time to notice it changed, does not exist here in any form. The change is the point. The fullness is the beauty. This does not mean there is no body anxiety. There is always body anxiety. The specific shape may change, but the feeling of looking at your own body and wondering whether it meets the standard is one of the oldest and most democratic human experiences available. A thin woman in 1300 wonders if she looks too thin. She wonders if people assume she is poor, or sick, or barren. She considers padding, layers of linen wrapped and arranged beneath the outer garments to create the illusion of a fuller figure. It works about as well as any body-shaping garment in any era, which is to say, it works beautifully in dim lighting and from a distance, and somewhat less convincingly in direct sunlight or close company. A woman who is naturally fuller than the ideal, if such a surplus is even recognized as a problem in this era, faces a different and arguably gentler version of the same anxiety. The beauty standard of 1300 is forgiving in ways that later centuries will not be. It has a range. It accommodates variation. It does not demand a single precise measurement. It asks for softness, for health, for the visual evidence of a life well-resourced. A woman carrying extra weight fits comfortably within that range. A woman who is thin sits outside it and must work to compensate. The reversal from the modern standard is so complete that it takes a moment to absorb. In this century, the woman who would be praised in a modern fashion magazine is the woman who needs to fake a different body shape to meet the local definition of beautiful. The male body ideal runs in a parallel direction. Broad shoulders, a solid chest, strong legs, and a general impression of physical substance. Not the sculpted, gym-built, carefully dehydrated physique that modern fitness culture photographs under strategic lighting. A body that looks fed, strong, and capable. A knight's body, built by activity and maintained by eating, not by restricting. The difference between a noble physique and a laborer's physique is not size, but presentation. The noble is solid because he eats well and trains. The laborer is lean because he works and does not eat enough. Both bodies tell a story. Only one of them is the story that beauty standards want to hear. And the single most powerful way to tell that story, the technology that turns a body into a message, is the thing wrapped around it. Clothing in 1300 is not something you put on. It is something you perform. Every layer, every color, every texture, every trim, every button and buckle and fold communicates information about your wealth, your status, your taste, your family, your ambitions, and your understanding of where you sit in a social hierarchy so precisely calibrated that the wrong shade of blue at the wrong dinner could be a genuine social error. Modern fashion communicates status too, but it does so through brands and silhouettes and subtle signals that require cultural literacy to decode. Medieval fashion communicates status through color, and color is not subtle at all. The reason is chemistry, or more precisely, the reason is the cost of chemistry. Fabric dye in the medieval world is derived from natural sources, and natural sources are not equally available. The cheapest dyes come from plants that grow locally and abundantly. Weld produces yellow, woad produces blue. Madder produces a reddish brown. These are the colors of the working population. Yellows, browns, dull greens, made by overdying weld with woad, and the particular shade of russet that becomes so associated with peasant clothing that the word itself eventually becomes a synonym for humble or rural. These colors are not ugly. They are warm and earthy and perfectly serviceable, but they are common, and common is the one thing beauty cannot tolerate. The expensive colors live at the other end of the spectrum. Deep scarlet red comes from kermes, an insect harvested from oak trees in the Mediterranean. The insects are collected by hand, dried, crushed, and processed into a dye that produces a red so vivid, so saturated, so unmistakably expensive that a single bolt of kermes-dyed wool could cost more than a skilled laborer earned in an entire year. Think about that for a moment. An entire year of work, translated into enough fabric to make a single garment. The cloak on your back could represent 12 months of someone else's labor, worn as casually as a modern executive wears a watch that costs more than their assistant's car. Blue gets expensive quickly too. Woad produces a serviceable blue, but the deep, rich, saturated blue that signals true wealth requires either extensive and expert dyeing with woad in repeated immersions, each one adding depth and cost, or the use of indigo, imported from Asia at prices that reflect the distance. The richest blue, the blue that kings wear, is sometimes achieved by dyeing with woad and then over-dyeing with indigo, a process so expensive and so labor-intensive that the resulting fabric is essentially a financial instrument in textile form. And then there is purple. Tyrian purple, the legendary dye extracted from the mucus of predatory sea snails, has been the single most expensive color in the Western world since antiquity. The quantities required are extraordinary. Thousands of snails yield a trivially small amount of dye. The process of extracting and fixing the color is lengthy, foul-smelling, and fiercely guarded by the craftsmen who practice it. By 1300, true Tyrian purple is rare enough that it barely exists in commerce. But the association between purple and supreme authority persists, and cheaper approximations using combinations of red and blue dyes attempt to capture something of its resonance. The result of all this chemistry is a world where color is money, displayed on the body. You can read a room in 1300 the way you read a parking lot in a modern, wealthy neighborhood. The colors tell you everything. Scarlet and deep blue are the luxury cars. Russet and undyed wool are the economy models. And everyone in the room is glancing at everyone else's outfit and performing exactly the same rapid, silent, devastating calculation that people perform in every social setting in every century. What are they wearing? What did it cost? And what does it mean about where they stand relative to me? Sumptuary laws make this explicit. These are laws, actual laws, passed by actual governments and enforced with actual fines, that specify which social classes are permitted to wear which colors, which fabrics, and which styles. In England, statutes dictate that only the royal family may wear cloth of gold. Only nobles above a certain rank may wear scarlet, dyed with kerms. Only knights may wear certain furs. The laws are detailed, specific, and regularly updated as new fashions create new anxieties about who is dressing above their station. A merchant's wife who wears a color reserved for the nobility is not simply making a fashion choice. She is committing a legal offense. She is disrupting the visual order of society. And the visual order of society is something that the people at the top of it take very, very seriously. The laws are also, by all available evidence, broken constantly. The frequency with which sumptuary legislation is reissued and strengthened tells you that the previous version was not working. People dress above their station whenever they can afford to, and whenever they believe they can get away with it, which is most of the time, because enforcing a dress code across an entire kingdom requires a level of surveillance that medieval governments simply do not possess. The sumptuary laws are less a functioning legal system and more a formal, recurring complaint by the aristocracy that everyone below them is getting ideas. Your own outfit tonight, assuming you are a woman of reasonable means, is assembled in layers. The innermost layer is a chemise, a long linen garment worn against the skin. The quality of the linen matters. Fine, bleached, softly woven linen is expensive and luxurious. Coarse, unbleached linen is cheap and functional. Nobody outside your household sees your chemise, but the feel of it against your body is one of the most intimate daily experiences of fabric in your life, and you know, with a certainty that does not require discussion, exactly where your chemise sits on the quality scale. Over the chemise goes the undertunic, or cot, a fitted garment in dyed wool that forms the main visible layer of indoor clothing. Over the cot, for formal occasions or for outdoor wear, goes the surcoat or surcoat, which may be sleeveless to reveal the fitted sleeves of the cot beneath, or may have its own elaborate sleeves, lined or trimmed with fur. A belt at the waist or hip, often decorated with metalwork, defines the silhouette. A mantle or cloak completes the outdoor ensemble, fastened at the shoulder with a brooch that is itself a piece of jewelry, communicating its own message about cost. Each layer adds expense. Each layer adds a message. The total outfit, from chemise to mantle, from veil to shoes, represents a concentration of wealth, labor, and raw material that is almost difficult to comprehend. The kermes-dyed scarlet wool of the surcoat alone could represent several years of a carpenter's labor. The fur lining of the mantle adds the value of several more. The silk veil, imported from the other side of the known world, adds months. The belt and brooch, worked in silver or gilded bronze, add weeks. You are wearing, from skin to surface, the combined economic output of a small workforce, condensed into fabric and metal and draped across a single human body. You look beautiful. You also look like a financial statement, which in 1300 is not a contradiction, and the men around you, as it happens, are paying just as much attention to their own appearance as you are to yours. The men around you are vain, quietly, determinedly, expensively vain, in ways that the modern world has largely forgotten to associate with medieval masculinity. The image you carry in your head, the rough-hewn, mud-spattered, unself-consciously rugged medieval man who has never looked in a mirror and would not know what to do with one if he did, is a fiction. It is a fiction invented by later centuries that needed the Middle Ages to be simple so that they could feel sophisticated by comparison. The actual men of 1300 spend time, money, and genuine creative energy on their appearance, and the beauty standards they follow are every bit as specific, every bit as demanding, and every bit as quietly absurd as the ones applied to the women. Start with the face. A well-groomed man in 1300 is clean-shaven or very neatly trimmed, depending on his age, his rank, and the decade. The fashion for facial hair moves in cycles across the medieval period, and in the early 14th century, the dominant mode among younger men of means is smooth. A barber is not a luxury. A barber is a necessity. He visits regularly, or you visit him, and the service involves a sharp razor, hot water, a steady hand, and a degree of trust that modern people reserve for surgeons and financial advisors. The barber shaves your face, trims your hair, and often performs additional services that have nothing to do with grooming and everything to do with the fact that the barber is, in this era, a minor medical professional. He pulls teeth, he lances boils, he bleeds patients, he sets minor fractures. He is the most frequently visited healthcare provider in most men's lives, and the grooming is what pays for the rest of it. The barber's shop is also a social space, in the same way that the bathhouse is a social space. You do not simply sit silently while a man holds a blade to your throat. You talk, you gossip, you discuss business, politics, the quality of this season's harvest, the questionable decisions being made by the neighbors, and the general state of the world, as seen from a chair, with your chin tilted upward and a towel across your chest. The barber knows everything about everyone, because everyone tells him everything, while he has a razor in his hand, and they have decided to trust the process. A medieval barber who could keep a secret was worth his weight in the silver pennies he collected for his trouble. The hair itself is styled with intention. In 1300, fashionable men's hair is moderate in length, often to the jaw or just past it, and shaped. It is not simply allowed to grow and fall however gravity suggests. It is combed, oiled with scented preparations, sometimes curled with heated implements, and arranged to frame the face in a way that flatters the bone structure underneath. A man who appears in public with unkempt, unstyled hair is making a statement about himself that he may not intend. Carelessness about appearance signals carelessness about other things. A man who cannot be bothered to comb his hair, the logic runs, probably cannot be bothered to manage his estate, keep his word, or maintain the standards expected of his rank. The rules are different for older men, for whom a fuller beard and longer hair can signal wisdom, authority, and a gravitas that the smooth-faced young man has not yet earned. The transition from clean-shaven youth to bearded elder is itself a form of communication. A man who grows a beard too early is presumptuous. A man who shaves too late is vain. The timing matters. The medieval world is full of these invisible social negotiations, conducted through choices that appear cosmetic, but function as declarations. And then there is the body. The male beauty standard in 1300 favors a physique that is substantial without being crude. Broad shoulders, a full chest, strong calves. These are the features that chivalric literature catalogs with the same obsessive, admiring precision that it uses for female beauty. The knight in a romance is described in physical terms that a modern reader would recognize as objectifying if they were applied to a woman. His arms are strong, his legs are well formed, his bearing is noble, his face is fair. The language is sensual, specific, and entirely unself-conscious about its appreciation of the male body as an aesthetic object. The calves, in particular, deserve mention. Men's clothing in 1300 includes hose, fitted leg coverings that display the shape of the leg from ankle to thigh, with a frankness that modern trousers do not permit. Your calves are on display. Everyone can see them, and the quality of your calves, their shape, their muscle tone, their proportion, is a recognized and discussed element of male attractiveness. A man with good calves is complimented on them. A man with disappointing calves is quietly noted. Padding inside the hose to improve the silhouette is not unheard of, which means the medieval equivalent of the push-up bra exists, and it is being worn by men on their legs. The human instinct to reshape the body through strategic textile engineering is not gendered. It is universal. Men also use cosmetic products, although the range is narrower than the full arsenal available to women. Scented oils for the hair and beard, breath-freshening preparations made from cloves, anise, and mint, skin washes designed to maintain a clear complexion, and hand preparations that keep the skin soft are all part of a grooming routine that a nobleman might follow without any sense that he is doing something unusual. A knight preparing for a feast or a tournament takes care with his appearance in ways that are practical, social, and aesthetic simultaneously. He wants to look good. He wants to smell good. He wants the effort to be visible without being obvious. The line between well-groomed and trying too hard is exactly where it has always been, which is to say, it is exactly where other people decide it is, after looking at you and making a judgment you will never hear directly, but will feel in the way the room responds to your entrance. The men who cross that line, who spend too visibly, who groom too carefully, who care too obviously, are mocked. Medieval moralist writing is full of complaints about dandies, about young men who spend more time in front of a mirror than a woman would, who wear their belts too tight, and their colors too bright, and their shoes too pointed, and their hose too fitted. The criticism has the specific, exasperated tone of an older generation watching a younger generation make choices that the older generation finds both baffling and faintly threatening. It sounds, in fact, almost exactly like every complaint about male fashion that has ever been published in any century since. The content changes. The complaint does not. The man who spends too long on his appearance has been getting mocked for at least 700 years. He has also, without exception, continued doing it. Mockery has never once defeated vanity. It has only made vanity slightly more discreet. And all of this vanity, all of this effort, all of this daily, weekly, yearly expenditure of time and money and pain and ingenuity, all of this labor, poured into faces and hair and bodies and clothing and scent, adds up to something. It adds up to an economy, not a metaphorical economy, a real one, with supply chains, distribution networks, profit margins, wholesale pricing, retail markup, skilled labor, imported raw materials, and all the other infrastructure that any functioning industry requires. The medieval beauty economy is not a collection of individual choices made by individual people in individual bedrooms. It is a system, and like every system, it has people at every level, from the miners pulling ore out of the ground, to the merchants selling finished products in market stalls, to the noble households that consume the final goods without ever thinking about the chain of hands that brought them there. We have already traced the ceruse from mine to dressing table, but ceruse is only one product in a catalog that runs to dozens of items, each with its own supply chain, its own cost structure, and its own network of producers, traders, and consumers. Consider the full inventory of a well-stocked medieval beauty supply. Ceruse and rouge for the face, kohl or antimony for the eyes, saffron, honey, wine lees, and the other ingredients for hair treatments, rosewater, musk, ambergris, and civet for fragrance, soap from Castile or Marseille, oils from olive, almond, and walnut, herbs in uncountable variety for baths, rinses, sachets, and preparations, tooth powders made from coral, sage, salt, and cuttlefish bone, depilatory pastes made from quicklime and arsenic compounds, combs carved from bone or ivory, mirrors polished from steel, or, in the wealthiest households, backed with a thin layer of lead or tin over glass. Tweezers forged by a blacksmith who probably had no idea that his small, precise instruments were being used to reshape the aesthetic landscape of an entire civilization, one follicle at a time. Each of these products has a cost. Each cost can be translated into days of human labor. And when you add them together, the total is not modest. A noble woman's annual beauty expenditure, covering cosmetics, hair preparations, fragrances, soaps, grooming tools, and the portion of her clothing budget dedicated to appearance rather than function, could plausibly equal or exceed the annual income of a comfortable tradesman's household. She spends in 1 year on her face and body what a carpenter earns in 12 months of daily work. And she does not think of this as extravagant, because every woman in her social circle spends similarly, because the social cost of not spending is higher than the financial cost of spending, and because the entire system is calibrated so that a woman who falls behind in the beauty competition falls behind in every other competition that matters. Marriage prospects, social invitations, household influence, the quality of attention from a husband who has, whether he knows it or not, internalized the same beauty standards as everyone else and responds to them with the same unconscious, economically driven reflexes. The beauty economy is not vanity, it is infrastructure. It employs miners, refiners, manufacturers, merchants, shippers, apothecaries, barbers, bathhouse keepers, herbalists, soap makers, perfumers, dyers, weavers, tailors, embroiderers, goldsmiths, blacksmiths, and every other trade that touches some part of the long, winding, enormously profitable chain that begins with a raw material in the ground and ends with a woman looking at herself in a polished steel mirror and deciding whether she looks expensive enough to leave the house. The trade routes that supply beauty ingredients are the same routes that supply spice, medicine, and luxury goods. The same Venetian merchant who ships ceruse to northern Europe also ships pepper, cinnamon, silk, and sugar. The beauty trade is not a separate economy running alongside the real one. It is woven into the real one so thoroughly that pulling it out would leave holes in the fabric of medieval commerce that would be visible from space if anyone in 1300 had the means to look. And at every level of this economy, someone is profiting. The miner profits least, as we have seen, and suffers most. The Venetian manufacturer profits handsomely from the processing and the brand reputation that the word Venetian carries. The shipping merchant profits from the distance between production and consumption, which is, when you think about it, the only thing a shipping merchant has ever profited from. The local apothecary profits from his knowledge, his discretion, and his willingness to stock what his customers want without asking why they want it. The church profits from tithes on trade. The crown profits from import duties. Everyone profits. Everyone, that is, except the two people at opposite ends of the chain. The miner who digs the lead, and the woman who wears it on her face. The miner pays with his health. The woman pays with hers. And everyone in between collects a margin on the transaction and goes home to count their money in a room that smells faintly of rosewater, because they can afford that now, thanks to the beauty trade that makes the whole arrangement possible. It is, when you step back far enough to see the full shape of it, a system of extraordinary sophistication, breathtaking cruelty, and absolute, perfectly ordinary human normalcy. It is, in other words, an economy, no different in its architecture from any economy that has existed before or since. The product changes. The structure never does. Your ceruse came from a mine. Your rosewater came from a distillery. Your musk came from a mountain in Central Asia and arrived at your dressing table by a route so long and so complex that if you traced it on a map, the line would cross half the known world. Every product on your dressing table represents a chain of labor, risk, and profit that stretches far beyond the walls of your room, far beyond the borders of your city, far beyond anything you will ever see or think about as you dip your fingers into the little pot and begin, once again, the daily work of being beautiful. But not everyone agrees that this work is acceptable, and the most powerful institution in your world has opinions about what you are doing to your face. The church has opinions about your face. The church has opinions about your hair, your clothing, your scent, your forehead, your cosmetics, and the amount of time you spend in front of that little steel mirror every morning. The church has, in fact, opinions about nearly everything you do to make yourself beautiful, and those opinions are not favorable. They are also not simple. They are not a flat prohibition, a single stern voice saying no. They are a complicated, contradictory, endlessly debated tangle of theology, morality, social anxiety, and genuine philosophical difficulty that the finest minds in Christendom have been arguing about for centuries without reaching anything resembling a conclusion. The basic objection is straightforward enough. God made your face. God made your body. To alter either with artificial means is to suggest that God's work requires improvement, which is, depending on which theologian you ask, either a minor sin of vanity, a moderate sin of deception, or a serious sin of pride that borders on a kind of quiet, cosmetic blasphemy. The argument goes like this: your natural appearance is God's gift. To paint over it is to reject the gift. To reject the gift is to reject the giver. And rejecting God, even with a pot of ceruse and the best of social intentions, is not something the church can endorse. This argument appears in sermons, in moralist tracts, in confessional guides, and in the writings of some of the most respected theologians in the medieval world. It is repeated with conviction, elaborated with ingenuity, and illustrated with vivid, occasionally horrifying examples of what happens to women who prioritize their earthly beauty over their spiritual condition. There are stories of vain women struck dead at their mirrors, stories of cosmetics that turn to fire on the faces of the damned, stories of the devil himself appearing in the form of a beautiful woman, painted and perfumed and glittering, only to reveal his true face when the illusion has done its work. The message is clear. Beauty is a trap. Cosmetics are the bait. And the woman who paints her face is painting a path to hell with every stroke. And yet, the same church that condemns cosmetics celebrates beauty. The Song of Songs, read allegorically as the love between Christ and the church, contains some of the most detailed, sensual, and frankly admiring descriptions of female beauty in all of medieval literature. Her teeth are like a flock of sheep. Her lips are like a scarlet thread. Her cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate. The language is physical, specific, and unmistakably appreciative. The Virgin Mary, the most venerated woman in Christendom, is depicted in art as beautiful, young, and radiantly fair. She has, in most paintings, the high, smooth forehead, the pale skin, the golden or auburn hair, and the serene, luminous complexion that the beauty standards of the era demand. She looks, in other words, like a woman wearing ceruse, even though she is not supposed to need it. The contradiction is not lost on anyone, and the theological gymnastics required to maintain both positions simultaneously are genuinely impressive. Beauty is a gift from God and should be appreciated. Enhancing beauty with artificial means is an insult to God and should be avoided. A wife should be attractive to her husband as part of her marital duty. A wife who makes herself attractive through cosmetics is deceiving her husband, which violates a different part of her marital duty. A woman's beauty reflects God's glory. A woman's vanity about that beauty reflects the devil's influence. The line between acceptable self-presentation and sinful self-alteration is thin enough to be invisible, and it moves depending on who is drawing it and what point they are trying to make. In practice, what this means for the average woman in 1300 is a quiet, functional hypocrisy that everyone participates in and nobody acknowledges. You use cosmetics. You attend confession. You listen to the sermon about vanity with a straight face, wearing the ceruse you applied that morning, sitting next to other women wearing their own ceruse, in a church decorated with paintings of beautiful saints wearing exactly the complexion you are trying to achieve. Nobody calls attention to the gap between the sermon and the congregation. The social agreement holds. The priest says what the priest is supposed to say. The women do what the women have always done. And the business of being beautiful continues, slightly guilty, but entirely uninterrupted. The confessional is where the negotiation becomes explicit. A woman confessing the sin of vanity is performing a familiar ritual. She knows it is technically a sin. The priest knows she will continue doing it. The penance is assigned. The absolution is granted. The woman goes home and opens the sarusi pot the next morning. The system is not designed to eliminate vanity. It is designed to manage it, to create a framework in which vanity can exist within a moral structure that technically forbids it, and to allow everyone involved to maintain the polite fiction that the structure is working. It is, in its own way, a remarkably sophisticated piece of social engineering. The church cannot stop women from using cosmetics. It can ensure that they feel appropriately complicated about it. Some theologians take harder lines. Peter of Blois, writing in the 12th century, describes cosmetics as a form of prostitution, arguing that a woman who paints her face is selling a false version of herself. The Speculum Laicorum, a 13th century collection of exemplary stories for preachers, contains cautionary tales about women whose beauty rituals lead directly to spiritual ruin. Berthold of Regensburg, a Franciscan friar famous for his popular sermons, rails against women who pluck their hairlines, paint their faces, and dye their hair, calling these practices violations of God's design and invitations to damnation. His sermons are vivid, entertaining, and by all accounts extremely well attended, which suggests that his audience enjoyed hearing about the sins of vanity, even if they had no intention of abandoning them. But the harder theological position has a problem, and the problem is economic. The beauty trade generates income. Income is taxed. Taxes fund the state. The state protects the church. The church collects tithes on trade, including trade in cosmetics, fragrances, dyes, and luxury fabrics. The financial infrastructure of medieval society is woven through with beauty money, and pulling that thread would unravel things that the church depends on for its own material existence. A bishop who condemns the vanity of women wearing silk veils is collecting rent from the merchants who import the silk, tithing the profits of the trade that produces the veils, and wearing vestments made from fabrics that are, in many cases, more expensive and more elaborately decorated than anything in any noblewoman's wardrobe. The moral authority to condemn beauty spending is undercut, quietly but thoroughly, by the financial interest in its continuation. And then there are the sumptuary laws, which sit at the intersection of church, state, and beauty in a way that reveals what the objection to cosmetics is really about. Sumptuary laws do not ban beauty. They regulate it. They do not say that no one should wear scarlet. They say that only certain people should wear scarlet. They do not say that cosmetics are wrong. They say that cosmetics above a certain quality or cost should be reserved for women above a certain rank. The objection is not to beauty itself. The objection is to beauty in the wrong hands. A noblewoman wearing ceruse and silk and musk is performing her social role. A merchant's wife wearing the same things is disrupting the visual order that keeps everyone in their place. This is the anxiety underneath the theology. It is not really about God's design. It is about social legibility. In a world without photography, without identification documents, without any of the systems that modern society uses to verify who people are, your appearance is your identity. Your clothes, your grooming, your scent, your complexion, all of these things tell the people around you where you belong in the hierarchy. When a woman of lower rank can afford the same beauty products as a woman of higher rank, the hierarchy becomes harder to read. The visual language of class breaks down. And when the visual language of class breaks down, the people at the top of the class structure become nervous because their position depends, more than they would like to admit, on being visibly distinguishable from the people below them. The church's objection to cosmetics is, at its root, the same objection that drives sumptuary legislation. It is the anxiety of a ruling class, watching its markers of distinction become available to people who are not supposed to have them. Ceruse should be a noble luxury. When the apothecary makes it available to a tradesman's wife, the noble's ceruse stops working as a signal of nobility. The product is the same. The message has changed. And the message is what matters. The debate between beauty culture and moral authority is not a medieval invention, and it is not a medieval relic. It is happening right now, tonight, in different language, but with identical architecture. The modern conversation about whether beauty culture empowers or oppresses women, whether the beauty industry sells confidence or manufactures insecurity, whether cosmetics are self-expression or self-erasure, is the same conversation that medieval theologians were having with medieval women, just with fewer references to hellfire and more references to problematic beauty standards. The vocabulary has been updated. The underlying tension has not shifted by a single degree. A woman in 1300, navigating the space between wanting to look beautiful and being told that wanting to look beautiful is spiritually dangerous, is performing exactly the same calculation that a modern woman performs when she reads an article about the toxicity of beauty standards and then opens her makeup bag the next morning. The guilt is familiar. The compliance is familiar. The decision to comply anyway, because the social cost of opting out is higher than the moral cost of opting in, is so familiar it barely needs to be named. You know this feeling. You have felt this feeling. The woman in 1300, sitting in a pew, listening to a sermon about vanity, with ceruses on her face, and a newly plucked hairline under her veil, felt it too. She did not need a modern vocabulary to understand it. She understood it perfectly, in the same wordless, practical, slightly exhausted way that women have understood it in every century. The rules say one thing. The world rewards another. You split the difference and get on with your day. But the reason you split the difference, the reason you endure the guilt and the cost and the daily labor of beauty maintenance, despite the sermons and the moralists and the small persistent voice in the back of your own head asking whether any of this is worth it, comes down to something much more concrete than vanity. It comes down to survival. Beauty in 1300 is not a hobby. It is not recreation. It is not an aesthetic choice made from a position of comfortable security. For most women, beauty is a strategy. A calculated, rational, economically motivated strategy for navigating a world where a woman's value is determined, to a degree that modern sensibility finds uncomfortable, by her ability to attract and retain male investment. Marriage in this century is a financial transaction. It is also, sometimes, a loving partnership and a genuine human connection, but the foundation on which it rests is economic. A bride brings a dowry. A groom brings an income, an estate, a trade, or a title. The negotiation between families is explicit, detailed, and conducted with the same seriousness that a modern corporation brings to a merger. And in this negotiation, the bride's appearance is a factor. Not the only factor, not always the decisive factor, but a factor that is discussed, assessed, and weighed alongside her family's wealth, her reputation, her health, her temperament, and her connections. A beautiful woman can compensate for a lower dowry. The math is not polite, but it is real. A family with limited resources can invest in their daughter's appearance, her clothing, her grooming, her cosmetic preparation, and that investment can shift the balance of a marriage negotiation in their favor. The beauty spending is not frivolous. It is strategic. It is an expenditure with a calculable expected return, no different in its economic logic from any other investment a family makes in its collective future. This does not mean that every woman who applies ceruse in the morning is consciously thinking about her marriage prospects. The beauty standard operates the way all beauty standards operate. It becomes internalized. It becomes normal. It becomes the water you swim in. You do not wake up each morning and think, I must apply lead to my face in order to secure my economic future. You wake up and think, I want to look nice. The strategic infrastructure is invisible from the inside. It is only visible from a distance of 7 centuries, and even from here, it is hard to look at without recognizing something uncomfortably familiar about the way it works. A wife's appearance, after marriage, continues to matter. Her beauty reflects on her husband's status. A well-presented wife signals a prosperous household. A wife whose appearance has declined signals a household in trouble, whether the trouble is financial, emotional, or simply the ordinary passage of time, doing what time always does. The pressure to maintain beauty does not end at the altar. If anything, it intensifies, because the consequences of failure are no longer abstract. They are domestic. They live in the same house. And the consequences of beauty's departure are slow and quiet, and almost impossible to confront directly. A noble woman who loses her looks does not lose them all at once. There is no single morning when she wakes and the beauty is gone. It happens in increments so small that each one is individually deniable. A new line that the ceruse no longer quite covers. A thinning of the hair that no amount of oil or egg treatment can reverse. A softening of the jaw that no arrangement of the veil can disguise. The changes accumulate the way debt accumulates, silently, relentlessly, and with an interest rate that never sleeps. The ceruse itself accelerates the process. The lead that made her skin luminous at 20 is destroying it at 40. The very product that created her beauty is dismantling it from the inside, and the only response she knows is to apply more ceruse to cover the damage caused by ceruse, more rouge to compensate for the pallor caused by lead poisoning. More product, more cost, more daily labor, invested in a project whose returns are diminishing with every application. The cycle is vicious and self-sustaining, and it ends only when the body can no longer absorb what is being done to it, at which point the woman is not merely less beautiful, she is ill, and the illness does not announce itself as vanity's consequence. It announces itself as ordinary aging, as a constitution that was never quite strong, as a weakness of the blood, or a chill that settled into the bones and refused to leave. The connection between the ceruse's pot and the trembling hands is invisible to everyone, including her. She knows she does not feel well. She does not know why. The ceruse sits on the dressing table, the same as it has sat every morning for 20 years, and tomorrow she will use it again, because what else is there to do? The alternative is to go out barefaced into a world that has already decided what a bare face means. Her household influence fades with her complexion, not dramatically, not in a single confrontation. It fades in the way that servants stop deferring quite as quickly, in the way that her husband's attention finds other places to rest, in the way that invitations arrive less frequently, and the invitations that do arrive are for less important occasions. She is still respected. She is still the lady of the house. But the small, constant, unconscious deference that beauty attracts, the extra half-second of attention, the slightly warmer greeting, the fractionally more generous interpretation of everything she says and does, that deference is withdrawing, and its withdrawal leaves behind a chill that no amount of rosewater or musk can warm. This is the quiet ruin. Not a catastrophe, not a fall, just a slow, almost imperceptible recession of something she once had and did not realize she was spending until the balance reached zero. The mirror, that tiny polished steel disc that once showed her a face the world rewarded, now shows her a face the world has begun to overlook. And she looks at it every morning, because the habit is decades old, and the ritual is all she knows. And she reaches for the ceruse, and she applies it, and she goes out, and she performs the role of a beautiful woman for an audience that has started to look past her. She is not a tragic figure. She is not a cautionary tale. She is a woman who played the game she was dealt with the cards she had, and the cards, as cards always do, eventually ran out. She deserves not pity, but recognition. The same recognition that every woman deserves who has ever stood in front of a mirror in any century and felt the distance between what she sees and what the world expects to see, growing wider by a fraction that nobody else would notice, and she cannot stop measuring. She was not vain, she was rational. And the system that rewarded her rationality is the same system that punished her for its inevitable consequences. But her story, quiet as it is not the most dangerous part of this. The quiet ruin is slow. The danger, the physical, measurable, medical danger of medieval beauty, is something else entirely. And it deserves its own reckoning. The danger has been present in every section of this story. It has been sitting in the cerusi pot since the first morning you opened it. It has been in the depilatory paste since the first time you spread it across your hairline. It has been in the kohl and the rouge and the hair bleach and the tooth powder and the bath preparations and the fragrance oils and nearly everything else that has touched your skin, your scalp, your lips, your eyes, and your lungs since you began the daily project of being beautiful in 1300. The danger has been patient. It has not announced itself. It has not presented symptoms dramatic enough to connect to their cause. It has simply been accumulating, quietly, persistently, the way sediment accumulates at the bottom of a river, one invisible grain at a time, until the riverbed has risen and the water no longer flows where it used to, and nobody can point to the exact moment when the change became irreversible, because there was no exact moment. There was only the slow, relentless arithmetic of exposure. Lead is the primary danger, and lead is everywhere. Ceruse is lead carbonate. The white base that makes your skin luminous is a lead compound applied directly to the largest organ of your body, which absorbs it steadily through every pore it touches. A single application deposits a small quantity of lead into your system. A week of applications deposits more. A month deposits more still. A year of daily use begins to reach levels where the body can no longer process and excrete the metal fast enough to keep pace with the incoming supply, and the surplus begins to settle into tissues, into bones, into organs that were never designed to store it and do not handle the imposition well. The early symptoms are mild enough to be attributed to anything. Fatigue that sleep does not resolve, a heaviness in the limbs that feels like the aftermath of a cold that never quite arrives, headaches that gather behind the eyes in the late afternoon and persist through the evening, constipation that becomes chronic and then simply becomes normal, a feature of your body that you stop questioning because it has been present for so long that you cannot remember what its absence felt like, a faint metallic taste in the mouth, present in the morning, gone by midday, back by evening. You mention these things to no one, or, if you mention them as minor inconveniences, as the ordinary complaints of a body, aging in a world where bodies age roughly and without apology. The middle symptoms are harder to ignore. The hands tremble, not dramatically, not the violent shaking of a person in crisis, but a fine tremor, visible when you hold a cup, or thread a needle, or try to apply the ceruse itself, which requires a steady hand that you increasingly do not have. The gums recede, exposing the roots of teeth that were already under assault from the sugar in your diet, and the combination of lead damage and sugar decay produces a mouth that deteriorates faster than it should, even by the standards of an era without fluoride or dental insurance. The hair thins. The irony of this, for a woman who has spent years plucking half her hair out deliberately, is not something she is in a position to appreciate. The hair she wanted gone is gone. The hair she wanted to keep is leaving of its own accord, and no amount of walnut oil or saffron rinse is going to call it back. The skin that the ceruse was supposed to perfect, begins to coarsen and discolor underneath the product. The pores enlarge, the texture roughens. A grayish undertone develops that the ceruse can cover but cannot correct, and each morning, the layer of product required to achieve the same luminous result grows slightly thicker than the day before. The product is creating the condition that only the product can conceal, and the concealment requires more product, which creates more of the condition, which requires more concealment. The loop tightens, the exit narrows. The woman inside it does not see the loop because she is standing too close to the mechanism. She sees only the daily choice, which is the same choice it has always been. Apply the ceruse and look presentable, or do not apply the ceruse and look like a woman who has stopped trying. In 1300, a woman who has stopped trying has made a social declaration she cannot easily retract. The late symptoms are severe. Abdominal pain becomes a recurring feature, sharp enough to double a woman over during episodes, and dull enough between episodes to be endured without seeking treatment that does not, in any meaningful sense, exist. The muscles weaken progressively, making tasks that were once routine gradually more difficult. Walking becomes tiring. Climbing stairs becomes an event that requires planning. The memory softens. Names slip. Conversations that happened yesterday become hazy. Conversations that happened last week become unavailable entirely. The personality changes in ways that the woman herself may not recognize, but that the people around her notice and do not understand. She becomes irritable, or withdrawn, or confused, or all three in rotation, and the people who love her attribute it to age, to temperament, to the mysterious and ungovernable shifts that women's humors are believed to produce in this century. Nobody attributes it to the ceruse. Nobody connects the pot on the dressing table to the tremor in the hand that opens it. In the worst cases, the kidneys fail. The organ damage becomes systemic. The body, overwhelmed by decades of accumulated lead, begins to shut down in stages, each stage producing symptoms that medieval medicine interprets as a separate condition with a separate cause and a separate, invariably useless treatment. She is bled. She is purged. She is given herbal preparations that do nothing because the problem is not herbal and the solution does not exist in this century. She dies, and the cause of death is recorded, if it is recorded at all, as a weakness of the constitution, a failure of the vital spirits, an imbalance of the humors that proved resistant to correction. The ceruse pot is still on the dressing table when they clear her things. Nobody thinks to move it to the category of evidence. And cerusy is not the only danger. It is simply the most common one. Rouge, the blush that goes on over the ceruse to simulate the natural flush of health on a face that is covered in lead paint, is frequently made from cinnabar. Cinnabar is mercuric sulfide. Mercury, like lead, is a cumulative poison. It absorbs through the skin, and its effects are, in their own way, as devastating as lead's. Mercury poisoning produces tremors more pronounced than lead's. It produces mood swings, anxiety, irritability, and paranoia. It causes the teeth to loosen and fall out. It causes the gums to blacken and swell. It produces excessive salivation, which is both physically unpleasant and socially mortifying. A woman poisoned by mercury from her own rouge is losing her teeth, drooling, shaking, and experiencing personality changes that her household cannot explain and she cannot control. The cosmetic designed to make her look healthy is making her visibly, undeniably ill, and the illness looks, to the people around her, like madness. Not all rouge contained cinnabar. Plant-based alternatives existed. Alkanet root produces a red that is safe to apply to the skin. Brazil wood produces a pink that is equally harmless. These options were available, and many women used them, but cinnabar rouge was more vivid, more long-lasting, and more prestigious than the plant alternatives, and the prestige attached to the superior product ensured that the more dangerous option maintained its market share despite the availability of safer choices. This is a pattern so deeply embedded in human consumer behavior that it barely needs commentary. The better product is the more dangerous product. The consumer knows this. The consumer buys it anyway. The market for safe and adequate has never once defeated the market for superior and risky. Belladonna, deadly nightshade, was used as an eye cosmetic. Drops of belladonna extract, applied directly to the eyes, dilate the pupils, creating a wide-eyed, luminous, softly focused look that was considered beautiful and alluring. The name itself, belladonna, means beautiful woman in Italian, and the association between the plant and feminine beauty was so strong that the name stuck permanently. The drops worked. They made the eyes look larger, darker, more captivating. They also, with repeated use, damaged the eyes progressively. Vision blurred. The ability to focus at close range deteriorated. Sensitivity to light increased. In severe cases, prolonged belladonna use caused permanent vision damage. A woman who spent years making her eyes beautiful was, by slow and quiet degrees, making herself blind. The drops did not know they were a cosmetic. They were a poison, and they behaved like one, regardless of the reason they were applied. The depilatory pastes used on the forehead and body deserve mention again in this context. Quicklime and orpiment, the arsenic compound that dissolved unwanted hair, also dissolved skin when left on too long or applied too aggressively. Chemical burns from depilatory pastes were common enough that the trotula and similar texts include specific instructions for treatment, which tells you that the complication was frequent enough to require a standardized response. The treatment typically involved soothing oils and poultices applied to the burned area, which helped with the pain and did nothing about the scarring that sometimes resulted. A woman who burned her forehead with an arsenic paste had a choice between living with the scar and applying more ceruse to cover it, which brings us back to the same closed loop. Damage, concealment, more damage, more concealment. And yet, with all of this, with the lead and the mercury and the arsenic and the belladonna and the chemical burns and the slow systemic poisoning that accompanied a lifetime of beauty maintenance in 1300, the women of this century continued. They did not stop. They did not organize a movement against toxic cosmetics. They did not demand safer alternatives. With the collective force of a population that had identified a shared harm and decided to resist it, they continued, individually, daily, because each individual woman faced the same individual calculation. The cost of using these products was uncertain, distant, and deniable. The cost of not using them was immediate, visible, and social. The math favored compliance. It always favors compliance. It favors compliance now, tonight, in a world where the products are safer, but the calculation is the same. Botox is a neurotoxin. It is injected into the face to paralyze the muscles that create expression lines, and it works, and it is enormously popular, and the long-term effects of repeated injections over decades are not fully understood because the product has not existed long enough for decades of data to accumulate. Tanning beds emit ultraviolet radiation at levels that significantly increase the risk of skin cancer, and millions of people use them voluntarily because the tan looks good and the cancer is theoretical and far away. Injectable fillers migrate through facial tissue over time in ways that are only now beginning to be documented, and the documentation has not slowed the market. The products are different. The chemistry is different. The willingness to accept uncertain, delayed, deniable risk in exchange for immediate, visible, social reward is absolutely identical. It has not changed. It is not going to change. It is, as far as the available evidence suggests, a permanent feature of the human operating system. And the cruelest feature of the system, crueler than the poison and the expense and the daily labor and the slow accumulating damage, is that the standard moves. It always moves. It has never once stayed still long enough for a woman who has invested everything in meeting it to enjoy the return on her investment in peace. The high forehead is the standard in 1300. It will not always be the standard. The fashion will shift, as fashion always shifts, driven by the same invisible forces that drive every trend, the desire of the elite to distinguish themselves from the masses who have begun to copy them. When enough women pluck their hairlines, the plucked hairline stops being a mark of beauty and starts being a mark of effort. The effortless version of the same look will be prized instead, or the look will change entirely, and the women who spent 20 years perfecting their foreheads will discover that the forehead is no longer the point. The pale skin standard will eventually give way too, not in 1300 and not soon, but eventually the tan will replace the pallor as the marker of leisure, as outdoor recreation replaces outdoor labor as the primary reason a person gets sun. When that shift happens, centuries from now, the women who poison themselves with lead to achieve the palest possible complexion will have poisoned themselves in pursuit of a standard that no longer exists. The standard will have moved. The damage will have stayed. Body ideals shift across the medieval period itself. The soft, rounded, belly-forward silhouette of 1300 will give way to different proportions in different decades. The specific shape that is praised, painted, and pursued changes with the generations, and each generation believes, with absolute sincerity, that its standard is the natural one, the real one, the one that has always been true and always will be. None of them are right. Not one generation in the entire recorded history of human civilization has held a beauty standard that lasted longer than the generation that held it. The standard is always temporary. The damage is always permanent. The gap between these two truths is the space in which the beauty industry has operated, profitably and without interruption, for as long as human beings have had mirrors and the vanity to look into them. A woman who plucked her hairline for 20 years cannot grow it back. The follicles, subjected to decades of repeated trauma, are dead. The hair is not coming back. When the fashion changes, and it will change, she will be left with a forehead that tells the story of a standard she once met perfectly and now meets not at all. The lead damage to her skin is not reversible. The mercury damage to her nervous system is not reversible. The arsenic burns have scarred. The belladonna has dimmed her vision. These are permanent alterations made in service of a temporary standard, and the disproportion between the permanence of the cost and the impermanence of the reward is so stark, so obvious, so visible from even a modest historical distance, that it seems impossible that anyone could have missed it. But they did miss it. They always miss it. We always miss it. The woman in 1300 cannot see that her beauty standard is temporary because she is standing inside it, and from inside a beauty standard, the standard looks like reality. It looks like the way things are. It looks like the way things have always been and always will be. The idea that a future century might look at her plucked forehead and her cerusse skin and her belladonna eyes and feel not admiration but pity is not a thought she is capable of having, because it requires a perspective that no person standing inside their own era has ever been able to achieve. And we, tonight, standing inside our own era, with our own beauty standards, our own products, our own quiet negotiations with risk and cost, and the slow passage of time, are equally incapable of seeing our own standards as temporary. We believe, with the same sincere, unshakable conviction that she believed, that our version is the real one, that our ideals are grounded in something more durable than fashion, that the things we do to our bodies in pursuit of beauty are worth doing, because the beauty they produce is genuine and lasting and true. It is not. It never has been. But that knowledge has never once stopped anyone from reaching for the pot, the tube, the syringe, the appointment, the routine, the daily ritual of becoming the version of themselves that this particular century, this particular decade, this particular fleeting and unrepeatable moment in the long history of human vanity has decided to call beautiful. Every generation believes its beauty standard is the natural one, the real one, the one that will last. None of them have been right yet. And so tonight, as you lie here in the warm and the quiet, think for a moment about the woman at the mirror, not the abstract medieval woman, not the character in a history book. The real one, the one standing in a cold room in 1300, with a steel mirror the size of a playing card, and a dressing table full of little pots, each one containing something that will make her more beautiful and less healthy in exactly the same gesture. She is not a fool. She is not a victim of ignorance or superstition, or any of the other convenient labels that later centuries will paste onto her to avoid looking too closely at the ways in which they are doing precisely the same thing. She is a rational woman, making rational choices inside an irrational system, which is all anyone has ever done in any century, including this one, including tonight. She wakes early because the routine takes time. She sits at her table in the thin gray light of a medieval morning, and she looks at her face, and she assesses it with the same honest, slightly merciless precision that you use when you look at your own face, in your own mirror, in your own bathroom. She sees what is there. She sees what is not there. She sees the distance between the two, and she picks up the first pot, and she begins the work of closing it. She plucks the hairs that have grown back overnight along her hairline. She washes her face with rose water. She applies the cerusi in thin, even layers, letting each one dry before adding the next, building the luminous, porcelain surface that this century has decided is the price of admission to the category of beautiful. She applies the rouge, just enough, not too much. She darkens her lashes with kohl. She scents her wrists and throat. She dresses in layers of dyed wool and imported linen, each layer adding cost, each layer adding message. She pins the veil over her golden, carefully bleached, carefully maintained, carefully hidden hair. She hangs the pomander from her belt. She checks the mirror one last time. She is ready, and she steps out into a world that will judge her, as it judges all women, by how closely she approximates a standard she did not choose, could not have influenced, and will not outlive. She deserves more than your curiosity tonight. She deserves your recognition. Because the woman at the mirror in 1300 and the person lying in bed listening to this right now are separated by 700 years of history, and 700 years of progress, and 700 years of changing fashions, and advancing medicine, and evolving social norms, and none of those 700 years have changed the fundamental experience of standing in front of a mirror and wondering if what you see is enough. It was enough. She was enough. She was always enough, and so was her mother, and so was her daughter, and so are you. And the fact that no mirror in any century has ever been able to tell anyone that simple truth is perhaps the oldest and saddest failure of a technology that humanity has ever produced. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your pillow, let the old standards fade. Let the ceruse and the rouge and the saffron and the urine bleach and the arsenic paste and the belladonna drops and the whale secretions and the crushed insects and the lead from a mine in Germany and the musk from a mountain in Asia all fade into the soft, quiet dark where old vanities go when the world is done with them. The people who made them were not foolish. They were not primitive. They were not simpler than you. And they were not less aware than you. And they were not any less beautiful than you, with or without the contents of their little pots. They were clever and anxious and vain and brave and entirely, stubbornly, wonderfully human, in exactly the way that you are human, tonight, lying here, letting your breath slow and your thoughts soften, and the whole, long, strange, beautiful history of human vanity settle around you like a blanket that smells faintly of rosewater and lavender and something warm underneath that you cannot quite name, but that feels, somehow, like comfort. Rest easy now. Let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes close whenever they are ready. The old standards are fading. The old mirrors are dark. And the only thing left is the quiet and the warmth and the soft, steady sound of your own breathing carrying you gently, gently into sleep.